This is a video that I have been planning for quite a while, and this is a different format than I usually do these videos. I'm experimenting with different types of video formats to see which formats you guys like or dislike. So in this video, you're going to see mostly graphics. You're not going to see me at all. And I'm going to answer a whole bunch of questions in this video that I've been getting. So on a regular basis, I get questions like, hey, Caleb, what do you think of Australia? How do you think Australia is going to do? Hey, Caleb, what do you think about Russia? How do you think Russia is going to do? Hey, Caleb, what do you think about Hong Kong? So in this video, I am going to go through the entire planet Earth. I'm not going to go through every country, but I'm going to cover all the large countries plus every region of the planet Earth in terms of where I think they are going. And I will do the best I can to give you the details that I have on where these countries are going. And as always, I am Caleb Jones. This is Alpha Male 2.0, freedom-focused lifestyle design for men. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. We do 5 videos a week here on how to make both your business and woman life more free. And we're doing an online course giveaway right now. That is a drawing for my business course on how you can create your own location-independent business. All you have to do is like this video, leave a comment on this video, and be a subscriber here at this channel. And I will announce the winners at the YouTube community feed at this channel. So what I'm about to do is I'm going to go through the entire planet. You see this beautiful map in front of you here. And we're going to zoom in on various countries, various regions. And I will give you my best guess as to where these countries/regions are going. I, of course, am not a genius. I don't have any secret hidden information that you don't have. I could be wrong. These are just educated guesses on my part. I have spent the past 15, 20 years or so traveling the world. I have done a hell of a lot of research into geopolitics, macroeconomics, the future of these various regions and countries. And so I think I'm right, but I could be wrong. But I'm going to give you at least a very, very good idea. Now, you can't just say that a country or a region is rising or falling. It's a little more complicated. So in this video, I'm going to classify every country or region into one of 6 categories. Category 1 will be rising. That means I think that country or region is going to do well over the next several decades. I think it's going to improve economically. Conditions will improve there. Standard of living will likely improve. These are the rising countries of the world. Second category will be countries that are collapsing. That is the opposite of rising. These are countries that are going down. These are countries that are going to get worse as time goes on. They're going to get, now, some of these countries will be collapsing very quickly. Some of these countries will be collapsing very slowly, and I will make that clear as we go along. The third category are countries that are maintaining. And that means that country is more or less going to be the same as it is. So if the country is doing well, it will continue to probably do well. If the country is doing badly, it will continue to do badly. That's what maintaining means. It's just going to keep going the way it's been going, most likely, plus or minus some minor factors. The fourth category is stagnating, which is different than maintaining. Stagnating means the country is going to decline very slowly, but it will not collapse. Instead, it will just stagnate. It'll just sit there, and my analogy is it will float like a turd in the pool. It won't do well. Matter of fact, it'll do probably poorly, but it will not collapse. It will not go all the way down. It'll just go to a low level and just sit there for the prolonged future. That's what stagnating means. Stagnating is very different than maintaining, because maintaining means if the country is doing well, it will continue to do well. Stagnating does not mean that. It just means it won't collapse. The next category are countries that are psycho. These countries are countries that are up and down. They're crazy. They do well, and then they do terrible, and then they do great, and then they do terrible. Or in some cases, psycho countries are very hard to predict because the people there or the governments there are just so crazy, so irrational, it's very hard to predict what they'll do, so they're psycho. And the last category is unknown. That means I just don't know. It's just, I don't have the data on those countries or regions, or it's just so hard to predict. I really have no idea, so I have to just say that I don't know. So I'm going to classify every country or region as we go into this map here on one of these 6 categories. So let's start with North America, and let's start with the easiest one, the United States, my home country. And I've talked about this a great deal. I'm just going to summarize it here. The United States is collapsing. The United States is screwed. The United States is going to collapse in our lifetimes. It's not going to collapse today or tomorrow or next year, but it is going to collapse in our lifetimes. Way too much debt, way overblown government, psychotic citizens, irrational voters, all 3 voting blocs in the United States. That would be the progressive left, the corporatist left, and the Trump supporters. All 3 of them have embraced hardcore irrationality and various brands of authoritarianism. And also, in addition to cultural collapse, Can't go into detail about that here, and I don't need to because I have written many articles with stats and links at my blogs, and I've also talked about this in past videos. Not going to go into detail about that, but the United States is collapsing, and it's collapsing in our lifetimes. Now let's move north to our friendly neighbors, the Canadians, the second nicest people on earth. I love my Canadian brothers. What is Canada going to do? Well, Canada is collapsing. Now, Canada is very different than the United States. It is not going to collapse nearly as fast as the United States. So in terms of the collapsing trifecta, the United States, Europe, and Canada, the Europeans will collapse first, the United States will collapse second, and Canada will collapse third. So Canada is collapsing much more slowly than the US or Europe, but it will collapse. The Canadian banks are very strong. The currency is very strong. There are a lot of things that Canada does right, and Canada does well. The problem is that Canada is one of the largest trading partners of the United States. I believe it is the third largest trading partner of the United States. And trade between Canada and the United States has gone up by triple-digit percentage points since the 90s because of things like NAFTA. So guess what happens when, not if, when the United States collapses? Canada will also collapse. Canada is going to be in very big trouble. And so the nature of the collapse will probably look much different than the collapse in the United States, but Canada is not a country that is going to do well long term. It will do poorly, although it will collapse much more slowly, like I said, than other countries that are collapsing. Okay, let's now go to the south and let's look at our buddies in Mexico. Mexico is very interesting. Mexico is a little complicated. It is very hard to predict, but if I had to pick one of the categories, Mexico will likely stagnate. I don't think Mexico is going to collapse. I don't think Mexico is going to do well. It is possible that Mexico will maintain, but I think Mexico is just going to be stagnating. When the United States collapses, yes, it will affect Mexico, but Mexico is a very different animal than Canada. It's not quite as first world as Canada, obviously, so I think that the collapse of the Western world will not affect Mexico as badly as it will Canada. So my best guess, and I could be wrong, this is one of these predictions where I'm not 100%, but if I had to make a guess, Mexico is likely going to stagnate. Now, let's move further south and let's cover Central America. So, Central America, when I talk about Central America, I'm going to remove two countries. I'm going to remove Panama and I'm going to remove Belize. I'm going to stick with Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua. So, you've got several countries that are doing very badly and several countries that are doing okay. So, Panama is the bright star of Central America. Panama is going to maintain. Panama is going to be very stable, very good. Panama could even rise. It's borderline rising. I'm not quite that bullish on it. I would instead say that Panama is going to maintain. Then you have the less insane, less mismanaged countries in Central America, which would be Belize and Costa Rica. My best guess for these is that these countries will stagnate or maintain. Really hard to say. The rest of Central America, Guatemala, Nicaragua, El Salvador, are literally the most dangerous countries in the world. In terms of crime rates, I think they're going to maintain. Maintain meaning they will continue to do badly. So that's basically Central America in a nutshell. Again, hard to generalize, but that's my best guess on these countries. Now, let's move further south. And then now to South America. Let's cover the shining star of South America, which is Colombia. I've talked about Colombia before. Colombia is rising, and it is rising fast. Colombia is actually rising faster economically than most of Asia. Colombia is going to absolutely kick ass over the next several decades. It's going to do very well. As we move further south, we have countries like Venezuela, Ecuador, Peru, various countries like that. The coastal countries, Guyana, French Guiana, things like that. Those, in my opinion, as best as I can guess, are somewhere between psycho and unknown. I don't have a lot of data on these countries. I have not visited these countries, so I really can't give you a strong indication of where these countries are going to go. They're not going to collapse, I don't think. They may bounce up and down. Who knows? Not really sure. Now we're moving into Brazil and Argentina. And I'm going to add Bolivia in there. Those three countries, Brazil, Argentina, and Bolivia, are psycho. These are the most psycho countries in the world. They are so psycho that they do well, and then they do terrible, and then they do great, and then they destroy themselves, and then they do wonderful again, and they destroy their currencies, and then they do great, and then they have a military coup. These countries are going to continue to be psycho crazy for the foreseeable future, which means they are very good for speculators, and they might be good for certain very dynamic very skilled business owners. But beyond that, you should probably be careful. You are more than welcome to live in these countries as an alpha male 2.0 if you have foreign income. But these are countries that are going to go up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down. Matter of fact, in places like Brazil and Argentina especially, you get the idea there that they kind of like it that way. They're like, yeah, we're a bunch of crazy psychos. Isn't this great? Woo! That's the attitude you get in these countries. Very different from Colombia, where when you go to Colombia, they point out their problems and they say, yes, we admit these are problems and we're working on them. That is not the attitude of Brazil. That is not the attitude of Argentina. And it is not the attitude of Bolivia, though I admit Bolivia is not quite as psycho as Brazil or Argentina. Now that brings me to one of my favorite countries in South America, which is Paraguay. Sleepy, quiet little Paraguay. Paraguay will maintain. Paraguay will be very stable. Paraguay will not do well, not do poorly, but it'll continue to do what it's doing. I've mentioned before, Paraguay is one of those countries where if the United States collapsed tomorrow, Paraguay wouldn't even notice. So Paraguay is going to maintain at its, second world status, whatever you want to call it. It'll just maintain. Chile. Chile is interesting. Now, 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, I would have said that Chile is rising, and it could be. I think more likely it will maintain. It will be stable and maintain what it's doing now. It may be rising. I don't know. I'm not sure. So maybe you could consider Chile some kind of midpoint or hybrid between maintaining and rising. That is entirely possible. Then we go over to the East Coast, where we hit Uruguay. In my opinion, Uruguay is probably going to stagnate. It might maintain, but I don't think so. Uruguay was doing a lot of really good things 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and now it looks like they're doing all the wrong things. They're not going to collapse. They're not going to have problems, but they're probably just going to stagnate, just float like a turd in the pool. No big deal. Okay, so that's South America. So now let us cross the Atlantic Ocean into Europe. Oh my goodness. Now, Europe obviously is very complicated. I have been accused in the past of oversimplifying and overgeneralizing when I say the word Europe, and that is a valid criticism. So in this video, I cannot cover every single European country. You're talking between 45 and 50 countries in Europe, depending on how you classify them. So I don't have the time to go through every individual country, nor do I have the data to do a deep dive on every single European country. So what I'm going to do, instead of just saying Europe, I'm going to break up Europe into several sub-regions and then generalize regarding those. Okay, so that'll be a little better than me just saying Europe. So let's start at the very north of Europe. Let's talk about Scandinavia. These happy, doopy socialists in Scandinavia. What is going to happen to Scandinavia? Scandinavia is collapsing for a number of reasons. You guys have way too much debt. You are running out of oil in the Norwegian Sea. Your voters have lost their minds. Your governments are giving millions upon millions of dollars to foreign rapists, and on and on and on. Now, I will say that Scandinavia is not collapsing nearly as fast as Western Europe. That is true. And so a lot of times I'll say Europe is collapsing, and I'll point out places like, United Kingdom, Germany, France, Spain, and so forth. And the Scandinavians will say, well, that doesn't apply to us because of X, Y, Z. That is partially true. So you're not collapsing nearly as fast in Scandinavia as you are in Western Europe, but you are still part of Europe, and you are going to collapse. Mark my words, Scandinavia will collapse in our lifetimes. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, that brings us down to what is called traditional Western Europe. As I've talked about many times, Western Europe is not only collapsing, it is collapsing faster than the United States. It is collapsing right before our very eyes. That will be the first region to collapse in terms of the Western world. Western Europe is in very, very, very big trouble. So next, we have Eastern Europe. Now, this is where the conversation gets very interesting. Some people say, well, yes, Europe is collapsing, but not Eastern Europe, because Eastern Europe didn't import all these immigrants like Western Europe does. And Eastern Europe doesn't have all these welfare state programs that are bankrupt like Western Europe does. And on and on and on and on. Now, here's the problem. And you will recall, why did I say Canada is going to collapse? Because it is a trading partner with the US. And when the US goes down, Canada will go down. Well, guess what? You guys in Eastern Europe, guess who you trade with? The rest of Europe. So when Scandinavia goes down, when Western Europe goes down, what do you think is going to happen to Eastern Europe? You think Eastern Europe will do just fine? No. Eastern Europe is either collapsing or stagnating, depending on the country and depending on the region. Now, as I've said before, and I'll be very clear about this, yes, Eastern Europe is going to collapse like Western Europe. However, it will not be as hard hit by the collapse than it will be in Western Europe. For example, if you live in Moldova, you're not going to experience, in terms of your day-to-day life and day-to-day finances, the pain of a collapse as badly as the people in Germany or France will. That's true, because you guys are already lower on the economic totem pole, so you're going to experience less pain. You will experience some pain, but it will be less hard felt in Eastern Europe than it will be in Western Europe. But don't think for a minute that Eastern Europe is going to be just fine when the rest of Europe collapses. As I've said many times, Eastern Europe is in Europe. That's why they call it Eastern Europe. They don't call Eastern Europe Eastern Asia. It's part of Europe. So you will be negatively affected by this, but I understand and I agree it will not be nearly as bad as in Western Europe or Scandinavia. Plus, there are some countries in Eastern Europe that instead of collapsing may just stagnate or even maintain. That is entirely possible. Okay, now we're going to go further east. By the way, when I say Eastern Europe, I am including places in the south such as Greece, Bulgaria, Turkey, and so on. That's as far east as I go when I say Eastern Europe. Now let's go a little further east into the Caucasus, and those are three little tiny baby countries that are kind of in this weird spot between Asia and Europe, and that would be Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan. The future of these countries is a little complicated. Georgia is one of my favorite places in the world. It's doing very, very well. Armenia is also doing a lot of smart things. Azerbaijan, not so much. So in terms of Georgia, I think Georgia is going to maintain. That is my best guess. Now, as I mentioned before, I have to qualify this statement. As I've talked about before, I don't like countries that border nations hostile to them. And unfortunately, Georgia's great, but it borders a country that is run by a dictator who likes to invade other countries whenever he feels like it, named Putin. And so it is entirely possible at some point that Russia may invade Georgia, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. Matter of fact, some of you have already pointed out Russia has already invaded Georgia back in 2008. So barring that, I think Georgia will maintain. I think Azerbaijan will stagnate, and I think Armenia will also maintain. Those are my best guess on those three countries. By the way, the Caucasus is a very interesting part of the world. I myself will be doing a lot of Five Flags in that region. All right, now, let's go down into the Middle East. Oh my goodness, here we go. Here's where the real chaos is, the Middle East. Now, the basic overall statement for the Middle East is that the Middle East is psycho, completely psycho, with the exception of a few of the smaller, less psycho, more organized nations. So these would be countries like Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, Oman. These countries will maintain. I don't think they'll rise, but they will definitely maintain. Outside of that, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Israel, Jordan, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Syria, these places are psycho. And they have been psycho for all of human history. Matter of fact, there are geopolitical experts that say that the Middle East, by and large, minus those few small countries, will always be psycho and will never not be psycho, unlike everywhere else in the world. Even places like Africa will eventually rise. But the theory is, and I'm not sure if I agree with this or not, but I understand what their point is, that the Middle East is just destined to be psycho forever, barring some radical change in the human condition. So that's basically it on the Middle East. Now let's go down into Africa. Africa is a little complicated. Lots of countries in Africa. 54 countries to be exact, although there's some debate about that, maybe 55, so a lot of countries. So I am going to list off the countries that I think are rising. Now, when I talk about parts of Africa rising, I don't mean rising the way that Asia is rising or China is rising or Colombia is rising. These African nations are going to rise very slowly. So they will rise, but it's going to take a long time. It's going to take many, many decades for these countries to rise. But I am convinced they will rise because A, they are so low on the totem pole, there's only one place to go but up, and because of population growth in these areas. If you look at the population data and you look at birth rates and population replacement rates and things like that, you will see very clearly throughout the entire world, white people are dying off, but black people in Africa are reproducing like rabbits. They are a humping and a pumping down there, and they will be doing that for decades on end. You will have, in our lifetimes, individual cities in countries like Nigeria that have 60, 70 million people in them in one city. insane, and that's going to happen, and that's going to result in a lot of explosive economic growth, at least down the road, once business owners, entrepreneurs, and big corporations get into these places and start exploiting them, which, by the way, China has already done. As a matter of fact, you could argue that China de facto runs Africa, but that's a conversation for another time. So I am going to list off the countries that I think are rising in Africa, and then I will cover the rest. So in no particular order, they are Morocco, Egypt, Nigeria, Guyana, Ethiopia, Uganda, Kenya, Rwanda, Seychelles, Namibia, and Botswana. Those countries, I think, are rising slowly. At the very, very south tip, you have, of course, South Africa, which is quasi-Western world. I think South Africa is going to stagnate. I don't think it's going to do well. I don't think it's going to collapse. I think it's just going to kind of sit there. They've done a lot of things wrong down there, and but not wrong enough to actually collapse their countries, and they can benefit from some of the economic growth in the rest of Africa. And you could argue that maybe South Africa will stagnate for a long time and then start to rise on the tail end of the rise of Africa. That's entirely possible, but that's a long, long time from now. I will be a very old man when that happens. Most likely, and again, I could be wrong. The entire rest of Africa, the entire rest of the continent is psycho. Very hard to predict. It may just be psycho for the rest of eternity, like the Middle East. Some countries might do well and then do badly and then do well and then do badly. Very hard to predict. Very chaotic region outside of the countries I've already listed. I have said before that if I was a young man in my 20s, location dependent, I would probably go to Africa and start some kind of companies over there. And boy, would I do well. It's a rough place to live, but for you guys brave enough to do it, multi-gazillionaires will be made in Africa. China's already doing this now. No reason you can't either. All right, let us move up to the north and to the east, and let's get into Central Asia. And this is basically the stands. Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, all those stan countries. What are those countries going to do? Well, that is very difficult to say. I'm going to have to mark that as an unknown for now. My wild guess is that these countries will either maintain or slowly rise. Slowly, but that is purely a guesstimate on my part. I really don't know. In 2022, 2023, I'm going to be spending some time in these countries. I'm going to get to know the economies a little better. And at that time, maybe I can give you a better idea for where these countries may or may not be going. Very hard to predict, especially because so many of these countries are landlocked countries, which is very difficult economically for most countries these days, although they may benefit from China's One Belt, One Road project and the rise of Asia and the rise of China. So it's very, very hard to predict. We'll have to see. Afghanistan, I already mentioned earlier, that is psycho. Now let's go down to Pakistan. Pakistan straddles the fence between psycho and rising. I don't know which one yet. I'm basically flip a coin, dude. It's very similar to Russia in that respect. Either they're just going to be psycho for the prolonged future, up and down, up and down, up and down, sometimes good, sometimes bad, or they will rise slowly. That is entirely possible. Really hard to predict. So I'm just going to say be psycho or rising. We'll see what happens. India. I have talked a lot about India. India is one of the most tragic countries in the world, in my opinion. India could rule the entire planet. They have over 1 billion people there. They have some of the smartest, hardest working people in the world. There's no reason India isn't a massive superpower right now. The problem is India is psycho. They are addicted to bureaucracy. They are addicted to big government. They took bureaucracy from the British and multiplied it by 20. And so now you have this crazy country where some people are doing very well, yet there's 500 million people who literally defecate in the streets. They shit in the streets. And they do things like make their own currency illegal. Matter of fact, at one point, they made some of their currency illegal, which actually shut down entire cities in India, caused all kinds of chaos and gridlock. I talked about this in one of my blogs. And sure enough, I had guys from India say, well, I think that's a great idea because, terrorists. So India does everything wrong. And for some reason, the guys dare defend it. I have talked also about the strange sexual societal programming that India has for its citizens. On top of that, you now have social problems. India used to be the lowest divorce rate country in the entire planet. The divorce rate in India is now skyrocketing as it assumes more Western attitudes, yet they are still not changing in terms of reducing their bureaucracy and things like that. Things like when you have a cell phone in India, if you travel across the country, every time you pass into a new region, you need a new cell phone, on and on and on. India, unfortunately, as much as I like it, and I love India, and I love Indians, I love those guys, work with a lot of Indians, they're great. The country, in terms of how it's running itself, is psycho. Now, that may change. Someday, India may get its head out of its ass, and when it does, it will be rising, and it'll be rising faster than China, which is pretty impressive. I just don't see that happening. I think if that was going to happen, it would have happened already, and it's just not. Sri Lanka is like a baby India, pretty much the same thing there. All right, let's now move over into China. China will run the world in the 21st century. China is rising. Now, when I say that, a bunch of guys say, well, Caleb, that's not true. It was rising, but it's not anymore. Incorrect. If you look at the growth rates, the economic growth rates of China, they have slowed, but they are still far beyond anything the United States has. Yes, instead of 15% growth rates, China's down to, quote, only 7 or 8% growth. Well, compare that to the United States' 2% growth and Europe's negative growth. So yes, China is still doing very well. China is going to encounter a lot of problems over the next few decades. That is very true. They have a serious demographic problem with the fact there's not enough women there. They have a gigantic real estate bubble, the biggest real estate bubble in all of human history. They have a goddamn authoritarian president for life. Yes, China will encounter lots of problems on its way up to number one, just like the United States did when it rose to prominence over its lifetime. People seem to forget, or they don't know the history, that the United States, from its journey from a bunch of backwater farmers to the number one power in the world, had depressions, not recessions, depressions, civil wars, assassinations, bank failures, world wars, all kinds of chaos, civil unrest, violence, yet they still made it to number one. China will be the same way. It will rise to number one in this century, and on its way up, yes, it'll encounter a lot of problems, but it will still get there. So China is definitely rising, although you could put an asterisk by rising with a lot of problems. Right to the north of China, we have Mongolia, and for the moment, I'm going to have to mark that as unknown. I just don't know enough about Mongolia. I don't know enough about its economic future or its current economics. Ask me in about a year, I'll have more information on that, but for right now, I'm going to have to mark Mongolia as an unknown. Now, let's go over to the Koreas. South Korea, North Korea, obviously two very different countries. South Korea is going to maintain. South Korea is already at the top of its game. It is one of the four Asian tigers, which would be South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore. And when you're at the top, it's very hard to go higher. So South Korea will maintain its spot at the top for the time being. North Korea, interestingly enough, will also maintain. It will maintain its current terrible, horrible, awful state. Now, one little thing about North Korea, it is entirely likely, I'm not predicting this, but it is entirely likely that in our lifetimes, someone will finally kill that guy and North Korea will open up and reunify with South Korea. I think that's just a matter of time. I don't know when that will be. It could be 100 years from now. It could be 20 years from now. But mark my words, when that happens, when Korea reunifies, that will be the biggest economic opportunity in the world, perhaps in all of modern history. The Koreans are extremely intelligent, extremely motivated, extremely hardworking, reasonably organized people. And when you have all of that drive and enthusiasm and capital from South Korea entering into North Korea, you're going to see an economic boom like you've never seen in your entire life. So possible opportunities if and when that happens. But for now, both Koreas will simply maintain. Oh, by the way, Korean women, best looking women in all of Asia. All right, let's keep moving east. And now we are in Japan. Japan, as I've talked about before, very unfortunately, is collapsing. It is the only nation in all of Asia that is collapsing. In several decades, there will be no Japan. They're not having enough babies over there. Men don't want to have sex over there. They have been in a zombie economy state for 25 years. Their stock market peaked 25 years ago. All kinds of problems. And the only thing the government apparently knows how to do over there is to either print more money or raise taxes. Oh, that's real smart, Japan. Yeah. As I've talked about before, Japan is a failure on a civilizational level. It is very hard to watch. It is very sad to watch. Very similar to my opinion about India. So Japan is collapsing. Very unfortunate. Now, let's go down to Taiwan. Taiwan is going to maintain, just like South Korea. It's just going to maintain its spot. I like Taiwan. I personally would not live in Taiwan, just like I would not live in South Korea. As I've said, I don't like countries that border hostile neighbors, and there's just too many Chinese missiles pointed at Taiwan for my taste. But in terms of economics and things like that, Taiwan will maintain its spot. Now let's move over to Hong Kong, my favorite country in the world. I get a lot of questions about Hong Kong, about, hey, Kayla, what about Hong Kong now that China's in there and now that they have protests and blah, 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 blah. I expected China to put its foot on the neck of Hong Kong around the 2030s. I was 10 years off. It's now started last year in 2019. Hong Kong, for the most part, will maintain its spot. However, very slowly it will start to collapse. Very, very slowly. It's going to take a very long time for Hong Kong to collapse, or at least stagnate economically. So for the time being, it is going to maintain. There won't be any radical, huge changes there in terms of, especially for the Alpha Male 2.0, if you choose to live there, it will maintain for a while. But Hong Kong has definitely peaked. It is now crested, and we're now coming down the other side. And so Hong Kong will start declining, but it'll start declining very slowly. It's not going to suddenly collapse or crash like the West, but it is on its way down, but it's a very slow, gentle slope on its way down. That brings us to Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia, as I have talked about many, many times, is the greatest growth region in the entire world. Just about every country in Southeast Asia is not only rising, but rising fast and rising hardcore. Hardcore, with the possible exception of maybe the Philippines. Every country in Southeast Asia is on its way up. It's a sharp move upwards. Myanmar, yes. Laos, yes. Thailand, yes. Vietnam, Cambodia, Malaysia. These countries are all on their way up, some of them faster than others. Bangladesh, I can't really speak to that. Probably Bangladesh, though, too. Yes, I would probably put that in that category of rising. Not as fast as the other countries, but absolutely. If you want to get specific in terms of Malaysia, I think it's going to go a little more slowly for Malaysia. Singapore, as I've already mentioned, is one of the 4 Asian tigers, and it will be maintaining. It will maintain its spot, its high spot. It's not going to rise because it's already risen. It's already in the top spot. Really hard to rise when you're still at the top spot. Indonesia, I think, is going to rise slowly. So I think it is rising, but very, very slowly. Mostly it will benefit from the increased economic activity of Southeast Asia to its north. Philippines is going to either maintain or stagnate. I'm not sure which one. I'm leaning in the direction of stagnating. The Filipinos are fantastic people, but they're a little psycho. Not quite as psycho as South America, but they are psycho. So it's going to be between maintaining and stagnating. Hard to say which one. Now let's go further south and let's go to our buddies Australia and New Zealand. I've talked about them a bunch at my blogs. Australia and New Zealand are going to stagnate. These are the quintessential examples of countries that are stagnating. These are the only two parts of the Western world that are not going to collapse completely. They will stagnate. The reason for that is 2 reasons. One is they don't have the debt the rest of the Western world has. And number 2, they're going to benefit from the rise of China, Asia, Southeast Asia in particular. If you go to Australia, if you go to New Zealand, even places around there, Oceania, places like Fiji, there's a lot of Chinese money in these places, more and more Southeast Asian money in these places. And so even when Australia and New Zealand do everything wrong, and these are hopelessly insane left-wing countries. Australia has made a very disturbing move toward authoritarianism in the coronavirus crisis, but even that is not going to completely collapse Australia. You're just going to stagnate down there. You guys are going to just float like a turd in the pool. Interestingly enough, I was looking at Australia to move to, and their tax laws were so ridiculous. They were just as bad as the United States, and that's really saying something. New Zealand wasn't quite as bad, but still pretty bad. So I am definitely not moving to those 2 countries, even though I like visiting those countries. But they're going to stagnate. They're not going to collapse, but they're not going to do well. They're just going to kind of sit there like a bump on the log, not really doing anything. All right, let's go all the way back up to the north to Russia. I have not talked about Russia yet. Russia is a little complicated. Russia is going to be one of 2 things, and I'm not sure which one. It is either psycho or it is slowly rising. I don't know which one. And I've said this before, and I'll double down on this. Russia really is a coin toss. You can take a quarter and flip a coin. Is going to do great or is going to do terrible. It could do either one. It really is a 50-50 coin toss for Russia. Russia has a lot going for it. a lot of natural resources. It has the military might of a real superpower, nuclear weapons, and so on. But Russia, unfortunately, is hopelessly mismanaged. Putin runs Moscow and St. Petersburg and not much else. All kinds of corruption, a culture with a lot of darkness in it. Unfortunately, I've talked about dating Russian women. Just a lot of pros and a lot of cons in Russia. Matter of fact, Russia, of all countries, has more pros and more cons in terms of the size of those two lists than any other country I can think of. It has a lot of both, which is why it's very hard to predict. So it's either psycho or slowly rising, one of those two. As to which one, who the hell knows? That could be either one. So now let's zoom out to the entire world. What I've talked about in this video is how these countries are going to do economically in terms of macroeconomics. I have not discussed in this video whether or not you should live there. You can live as an alpha male 2.0, certainly when you have location-independent, foreign-based income, you can live in all kinds of places that might be psycho, that might be stagnating, that might be unknown, even in some cases, if you're very careful, collapsing, and still be okay. And of course, you will benefit if you live in rising countries as well. So I'm not really talking in this video here about best places to live. I already did another video on that recently. Matter of fact, you can click here for that video if you want. Otherwise, if you need more information on how to design this kind of lifestyle, you want to go to joinsmic.com. That is my coaching and mentorship program. And if you like this video, if you like this format, please let me know and I will do more videos like this. Have a good one.